Hey guys, welcome to 24 Chambers of Film. Nathan here, and today I want to talk about Final Destination, the horror franchise, not just one specific film, but all of them together. Because, with Bloodlines, Final Destination Bloodlines coming out in May, it seems people are really, really excited about it. Me personally, from what I understand about the story, I don't think the story is a bad idea. I feel like the production could possibly be better just from the trailer. So I'm excited for it, but I'm not like, ooh, excited over it. I'm gonna end up watching it, but my hopes are somewhat tempered. I don't I don't think we're gonna get something that makes me say, oh, this is better than the first one, second one, the third one, or the fifth one. What I'm hoping though is that we beat the fourth one, the NASCAR one, the racing one. That one to me was by far the the worst of the bunch. And even then though, it wasn't there's plenty of other horror movies that rank well below it. So with Bloodlines coming up, I really started thinking about like how Final Destination really is a masterpiece of a horror franchise, and it could possibly be one of the greatest or arguably the greatest horror franchise of all time. And not from the perspective of okay, you have a ghost face, you have Leatherface, you have Freddy Krueger, these iconic characters, but from the fact that this movie can continue to be made for years to come, and you could always give it a fresh coat of paint, and it's not going to be ridiculous. For example, with Jason Voorhees, it's so ridiculous when a Friday the 13th movie comes out now because this guy died like five times already, right? Michael Myers, the same thing. He keeps dying, and then you got to start remaking it and all this other crap. Freddy Krueger started off fantastic, scary in your dreams, and by the end, he somewhat of a joke. They did the remake, which I honestly thought the remake got unnecessary hate. Um, but your only option then becomes to remake, where with Final Destination, you can continue to come up with creative ways on how you're going to try to cheat death, or how death comes in and tries to take a bunch of people out in one fell swoop and someone affects that. And I will give them this on Bloodlines. They have gotten creative because it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like it's just the repeat of the first five, which are, hey, guy cheats death, and then death comes after them immediately, and they got to figure out if they're going to be able to cheat it again. This one, again, from everything I'm seeing, basically from the trailer, is that a girl's family starts to basically get knocked off one by one, and then it turns out that her grandmother cheated death at one point, and now death is coming to collect because her entire bloodline should not exist because the grandmother should have died however many years previously. So that's a I'll give them credit that the fact that they didn't just go with the let's do the same thing we've done for all other five. Now, another thing for Bloodlines, before I go touch back on how I think Final Destination might actually be the best horror franchise of all time, they waited quite a bit to release this next one because Final Destination 5, if I am remembering correctly, came out in like 2011 or something. Let me verify. Yeah, 2011, Final Destination 5. So it's been 14 years since we've had a Final Destination. And for those of you who watch the channel, my brother Steven, we do the videos together a lot of times. He brought up with Scream, one of the reasons that Scream has been so successful is because they did three movies and there was a gap. Then they did Scream 4 and then there was another huge gap. And that keeps it relevant because you're not churning out movie every year, year after year, and kind of basically wearing it thin, right? Because when you think of the Nightmare on Elm Street, when you think of the Halloweens, when you think of the um, Friday the 13th, it all those movies get released in such a short time span that it just oversaturates the market, and then people stop caring. The perfect example is like a Nightmare on Elm Street, right? When that came out, they had about six movies in a span of 10 years. Now, for Final Destination, when they did the movies, they came out in they came out 2000, 2003, 2006, 2009, and 2011. So at least you got five movies in a span of 11 years, but they were kind of spaced out in 3-year intervals. Now, the first three, I think worked out perfectly, in my opinion. Three movies in 6 years, and they to me have the best stories out of all of them. The Final Destination, which is Final Destination 4. Like I said, that was the worst one. And I feel like that was when they really started, I think, trying to push the whole 3D premise. And the story kind of didn't get the love it deserved because of that. And when they went back to Final Destination 5, again, the 3D premise was being pushed, but they kind of, that was a prequel, so they focused on trying to tie the story, which I think is something that made them, kind of work a little bit harder because they had to tie the story together. Now, I think overall, as a whole, Final Destination, the only thing it is lacking is a recurring character that's memorable, right? That you can kind of think of. Tony Todd kind of filled that role because he was in the first two and then the fifth one. And, famous for Candyman, but, plays Bill Bloodworth in Final Destination franchise. If anything, I would like to see him in every single one. And the third one, I believe he was like a voice in the at the amusement park of one of the statues, and then he didn't come out in the fourth one. But it would have been nice to see him in all of those as kind of like a binding glue for every single movie. Unfortunately, any ones after Bloodlines, he's not going to be in because sadly he passed away. But his final movie role is in Bloodlines, which is kind of fitting that a horror movie, for a franchise like Final Destination is his final role. So that's one of the reasons why I'm going to watch Bloodlines as well when I decide to watch it, whether it's going to be in theaters or I wait till it's on streaming. But him being in there, again, he should have, in my opinion, he should have been the binding glue. If I try to think about what's wrong with the franchise that they've done so far, I mean, like I said, I could pick apart number 4 just because of the production quality more than anything, right? The special effects and things like that. But I mean, it's a top tier horror franchise. I think it has mass appeal, right? Because these are all things that people are going to have to think about, right? Getting on a plane, getting on the freeway, going on a roller coaster, shit. Now going to a NASCAR race, right? Crossing a bridge, like in the fifth one. And now I'm curious as to what they're gonna get you to really think about here in Bloodlines, which from the trailer, it's going to be like the Space Needle coming down. But either way, the more I think about it, again, production wise, I felt like some of those effects could have been a lot better in that trailer. But as I start thinking about the story, I definitely think that they went a unique route by not just rehashing the playbook from the previous ones because they easily could have done that, right? It's been 14 years since one was released. So boom, let's just basically run that playback again, run the playbook again, and create something very similar, just with a different catastrophic event that kills a bunch of people that they narrowly escape and death comes after them. So I think it was very creative by trying to do the Bloodlines thing. I feel like if this does well at the box office, which I would have to assume it will, because I believe all of them have done pretty well at the box office. I don't think any of them you can say are box office failures. Final Destination 1 did 112 million at the box office on a $23 million budget. Final Destination 2, let's see what it did here. It did 90 million on a $26 million budget. Final Destination 3 did 118 million on a $25 million budget. So it actually improved from the second one, which a lot of times you don't end up seeing that. It's kind of a steady decline. And then the Final Destination did 187 million on 40 million. I'm actually, now that I'm looking at these numbers, let's see, Final Destination 5 did 157 on 40 million. You know what? I don't know whose call it is, but whoever said, let's stop in 2011 and let's take a break from this, kudos to them, because they are now setting themselves up for probably like another 10-year run where they could release another 3 or 4 movies, and they're probably going to perform well at the box office. The only thing that I would say now that has changed from this, though, is the fact that when the franchise came out, movie theaters were running strong. Now I think movies, with the streaming services, You don't see these crazy numbers at the box office unless you're talking about these Marvel movies. So it is going to be very interesting to see what happens. But again, with Final Destination, story wise, flexibility wise, with what can be done with the story and the characters, I think the sky's the limit. And the one thing that it works out great for them is that characters never survive, right? You don't cheat death. So it gives them a fresh batch of characters every single time. It's not like a Scream where if Sidney Prescott doesn't come out in the movie, why isn't Sidney Prescott in the movie? It's not a movie, which a lot of horror movies don't necessarily kind of have, right? Like in Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, you got to have Freddy and all of them, right? You got to have Jason. The bad guy is really the binding glue and all of those. But again, here you have a bad guy that when Robert England, when they made the remake, people were not happy about that, right? To them, Robert England is Freddy Krueger. When Robert England passes away, how do you replace an icon like that? Right here, your killer is invisible. Death is invisible. They come at you from every single angle, yet you don't know what he looks like. So they're not tied into anything. You got to give credit, man. Jeffrey Reddick, who is the guy who wrote and came up with the idea of Final Destination, like the guy, I don't think gets enough recognition. And realistically, I never even thought about who created Final Destination. And once I looked into it, I was like, this guy came up with one of the most genius ideas for a horror franchise. I'm sure at the time he might not have been thinking it was going to be a franchise, but because of him, there is a franchise now. Interesting story about him. He sent in a 10-page treatment to New Line Cinema, who created A Nightmare on Elm Street, and he sent a 10-page treatment on A Nightmare on Elm Street, and they didn't read it because they didn't take unsolicited work. So he ended up reaching out to Robert Shea, who was one of the heads of New Line Cinema, and they actually started a back and forth relationship over the phone, over writing. And then he ended up working as an intern at New Line Cinema, which is kind of cool to see that, I guess I feel like, and I don't know because I'm not in the movie industry, but it seems like back then, in the 80s and the 70s and stuff like that, maybe like early 90s, you could build these connections where now just trying to get to like a random studio head seems almost impossible. But Jeffrey Reddick, man, kudos to you because you made basically a horror franchise that has no end in sight. As long as they want to keep these going and they want to keep them relevant, they are going to be relevant and they're going to keep them going. So, with that said, I'd like to hear everyone's opinion. What do you think? Is Final Destination the best horror franchise from the perspective, again, I know there's very iconic horror franchise characters, the Freddys, the Michael Myers, all those guys. But from the perspective of they have unlimited potential with what they can do. They never have to remake the first Final Destination, which I actually wouldn't be against if they remade it because obviously and even a remake really doesn't have to be a remake. It just they maybe take the plane concept and reuse it because the first one coming out in 2000, technology was different at the time. If they redo that now, how people communicate, how everyone gets, how stuff happens, completely would change the dynamic of the movie. Um, but essentially, they have this infinite glitch to create these movies because they're not bound to a killer like we mentioned, Michael Myers, and they're not bound to characters like Sidney Prescott or a Dewey or anybody from like that Scream universe, like they are there, right? And so to me, that kind of gives it the upper hand from all these other horror film franchises because at the same time they could say, hey, we're gonna think about it. Final Destination 1, Final Destination 2, Ali Larder crossed over from the first one to the second one. That's the only time that's happened in a Final Destination movie, right? And then she gets clipped at the end of Final Destination 2. And then it's a whole slew of new characters that aren't connected. And then 5 ties into 1. I mean, they could play with this like a jigsaw puzzle 100 different ways, an infinite amount of ways. And to me, you kind of have to give it its flowers as one of the top horror franchises, arguably the top horror franchise because of the flexibility and the ability to continue this without potentially jeopardizing. How are you going to make a Freddy Krueger or a Michael Myers movie 20 years from now with the same character, right? You got to remake it. You got to restart it. You got to basically go back to the well and start over. They never have to do that if they choose not to. So I think that's genius, and I think it goes underappreciated by a lot of people in the horror. When it comes to horror movies, I think it's just an oversight because they don't have that iconic character, right? They don't have that Michael Myers, that Leatherface or anything like that. So there's a lot of hype for Bloodlines. People are super excited about it. I believe it's the second most viewed trailer by New Line in the first 24 hours behind it. Yeah, people are excited about it. It's been a long time since we had a Final Destination. And I think people are ready for it again. Like I said, I have my criticisms of the trailer for Bloodlines, but I'm excited to see it back because I love the franchise. I think it's one of the best franchises. And Tony Todd's final movie appearance. Let me know in the comments, guys, if you guys are going to be watching Bloodlines, if you're excited for it. Overall, what you think about the Final Destination franchise. Want to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching. Once again, I'm Nathan, and this is 24 Chambers of Film.